Welcome to CERT's IT Service Solution Podcasts. In this episode, our host, Jon Grainger, CTIO, chats to Agile Delivery Specialist David Laycock about the success factors of Agile within the public sector and exploring the wider flavours that Agile can offer. Let's dive in.
So Dave, thank you very much for joining me on this. I don't know if it's raining where you are. It's cats and dogs up in Yorkshire on a Friday afternoon after a long week. Really appreciate it. And we're going to be talking about Agile. There's lots and lots of things talked about Agile, but actually you and I were discussing this earlier in the week, and we thought actually what would be interesting was to say, is there something different or special about Agile when it's done in the UK public sector? So that's kind of, that's what I thought would be great for us to talk about. Before we kind of tee that off and get stuck in, it'd be great to get just a bit about your background, your experience. What is your public sector Agile experience? How did you find yourself kind of in there and doing that? So just a bit about your background, really.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, John. It's good to be here. It was about 7 or 8 years ago I started working for myself. I kind of ended up in the public sector, and it wasn't necessarily intentional. The last couple of projects I'd worked on in the outsourcing provider were in the public sector. I enjoyed it. When I started working for myself, it kind of just lent itself to that kind of work. So, and that's brought me to where I am today.
And do you remember your first Agile project, or do you remember Agile kind of coming in and being a thing and kind of getting your head around it? Or, so what was your, how did you kind of get introduced to Agile, or kind of, how did it get on your radar?
It must have been around 10 years ago when I was still working for the outsourcing provider, and I remember kind of being one of the kind of team leads in a department, and somebody was coming along saying, we're going to try and move to Agile, we're going to try and be a little bit more Agile. So they took the leadership team away and said, right, this is Agile, this is what we're going to need to do, we'll try doing this. And at the time, in my early Agile naive days, I was like, this isn't that difficult, we can do this, you only have to do this and do that, and it's okay. And looking back, like I say, it was very naive. It's the sort of thing, 10 years later, I wish I could travel back in time and give myself a bit of a slap around the head. And say, actually, you didn't really get it. You weren't really bought into it. And whilst we did a few Agile bits, it really didn't sink in until probably about a year or so after doing these sorts of things, and then engaging with the kind of coach that was leading us on the journey. Because each time they'd be like, well, what about this? And what about that? And have you tried this? And what about doing this? This might help. And it was only, I suppose, years later, it occurred to me that it was a bit of a journey, a bit of a learning exercise to realise that actually what he was doing was actually quite good for the environment we were working in, which could afford to be a little bit flexible. We had the flexibility in what we were doing. We could try different things, and if it didn't work, we could tweak it and move things around a little bit. It was only after, like I say, many moons to realise that flexibility is inbuilt.
David, it made me think when you talked about the first time you used or adopted it and the mistakes you made, and can you travel back in time? Do you think actually that's still happening? I think with folks, everyone goes through that sort of phase when they first encounter Agile. So even though for you it was 10 years ago, but do you see that at all? Do you still encounter folks who haven't really used Agile before, there's a resistance to it, or do you think actually now that's kind of done and everyone's sort of on the other side of the fence?
I think it's still there to an extent. I enjoy working with teams, and one of the things I found recently working certainly in government is there's a lot broader acceptance of it as a kind of mindset. And I think with that, people that kind of move into this space want to understand a little bit more about the roles. So inherently, you find people that are actually open and interested in learning a bit more about what it means to be Agile and what's behind it. So certainly in the areas I've been working in, for the most part, I think people are much more bought into it, which is a fantastic start for Agile, because you've got to have that openness. And like I say, I go back 10 years and I realise I probably wasn't as open as I thought I was back then. So certainly in the spaces I've been working in around the public sector, it's like I say, it's been a lot more acceptable from my experience. Yeah.
Does Agile replace project management or planning? So if you're doing Agile, do you still have to plan?
We do, yeah. We still do a lot of planning. Like I say, Agile is a mindset, and there are various flavours of frameworks that you can adopt to be Agile. And a common one is Scrum, for example. And essentially you work in cycles. We work in 2-week cycles. And what that enables us to do is size work on a 2-week basis. And on a grand scheme of things, you're talking about planning in particular, we're able to plan in those cycles. So what we'll say is actually, let's do that piece of work, but we'll do that in 3 cycles time, the sprints as we call it. So we will say actually, let's do that piece of work in 3 sprints time. Now, I think the thing with that is you're actually planning 3 sprints ahead is not unusual, but the further out you plan, the more flexibility you might require down the line. So planning is still a kind of core part of what we do and how we do it. I think people still, when they kind of have an expectation of something being built, something being done, something being enhanced, they still have an expectation or would like some idea of what the kind of timelines might be. So yeah, planning is still very much part of what we do.
And David, that reminds me of something they say about planning. Yeah. So the first thing is that sort of statement sort of suggests that it says, if you do Agile, do you have no certainty? That's really what it's saying, isn't it? But actually, when you put a plan together, I mean, it's the old saying, isn't it? The plan is out of date the second you've written it.
Yep.
But the value you get is planning. It's the process of planning that gives you the value. If you think you're going to put a plan together and exactly it's, everything you've written, you've confused a plan with a really detailed prediction of the future. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, in anything you do, you're going to do planning as a process.
Yep.
It's just you've got a framework around it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, it is. I think a good example, and it's kind of a fundamental part of how we work in Agile, how I've been working with some of the teams, is when you're working with a really good team and an experienced team, which is the same for however you decide you want to develop something in the IT digital space, having a really good team is a key success factor, isn't it? It's critical that you've got a team you can trust. And something that happened to me a couple of years back was we were working with a really good team, and somebody came along and said, well, actually, we want to do this with this particular product. How long do you think it'll take? And it wasn't a small piece of work. And one of the things I was able to go back to our lead developer and say, well, look, we've been asked how much this is. And he was like, oh, that's really big. And so immediately it was like, well, how big is it compared to this other piece of work we did? It's like, probably not quite as big as that. And it's like, oh, okay, then what? A lot smaller or just a bit smaller? So probably a bit smaller. And we had this discussion about how big it was compared to this thing we'd done. And I was able to say to him, well, that thing took us 2 months. And he was like, no, yeah, it's about, And actually, that was good. That was great, because what it enabled me to do was kind of give an indicative. Look, you've asked me for an indicative kind of idea. It isn't a plan, but what I can say is, based on this previous piece of work, it's about the same, and it's going to be about 2 months. And I think that's a core part when we talk about planning in Agile. Being able to do that, having the experience in a team to say that is a big plus. But then you start talking about, well, okay, then how experienced is the team? And that's a whole other chapter.
Yes. You know what? I completely agree with you, because if you think about it, and actually it kind of gets us a little bit into the next question, which is around Agile being a silver bullet.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter what method you go through. If you've never done something before and nobody in the team has ever encountered it, you've got no point of reference.
Yeah.
It's not really a method problem. It's an experience problem.
It is. Yeah.
So actually, if you really do understand the space well, you can make those estimates, because that's so I suppose what we're saying is Agile is absolutely no substitute for experience, but in this instance, the example you were giving is it's a really good framework if you have experience, because it's a much faster way of maybe sort of getting an idea of the problem space, the size, the sort of the risks, etc.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I suppose that does lead us into that that next statement. So, and I think this silver bullet point, I've not met anyone who seriously said it's agile and it does everything, as in the silver bullet. So I think this question is more addressing people who are hearing about agile sort of at the side of activities. They're not quite drawn into exactly what it's about, but they've heard a lot about it. And I think if you want to adopt something as a team, you do have to sort of shout about it a bit more than maybe you need to, just to get the change. And therefore you get a perception that, so it's just agile now, this sort of silver bullet. So would you say, I suppose, so if we do very strictly the silver bullet analogy, is the kind of, is it right, would you use agile in absolutely every scenario that you're faced?
Definitely not. And again, from experience, you have to take a step back sometimes. I worked in a department a few years ago, and there was a particular piece of work that I was asked to get involved in. And it was a migration piece of work. It was a data migration piece of work. We had a project manager looking at it, and he was trying to work in. He was trying to work in Scrum and do cycles. He had a big long list, and actually we had a discussion and we sat down. And I said, "So what you have here is a kind of linear. You have to do a certain set of things in a certain sequence, yeah." And he agreed with that. I was like, "So why are you using agile?" And he went straight to that, well, it's 2-week cycles, it delivers value easier. I said, well, maybe so, but in your example, the project you're involved in, the activity you're trying to do is a very linear one. And actually we said, I think you probably need to drop agile in this. This is very much a waterfall project. You have a linear set of requirements. You know exactly what they are, and you can get timelines from everybody in the link in the chain, and develop it that way. And it was really interesting to have that discussion, but it was that kind of step back. It's just because we are working in an agile space doesn't mean to say you have to adopt a kind of agile approach for something and make it fit, make it really work for that piece of work that you're doing, when actually you know your requirements, it's a linear piece of work. It's classic waterfall. That's probably the best way to get that piece delivered. And so we kind of scrapped the agile kind of methodology or mindset in that particular example, adopted a bit of waterfall, and it kind of went through as you would expect.
It's very obvious that it's not a silver bullet. I think, though, when folks who are doing something maybe should be very well suited to waterfall, but they're turning to agile, aren't they sort of trying to innovate a little bit, even the waterfall approach? That discussion you were having with that project manager about, and you said, actually, this is waterfall. The fact that the project manager was looking at taking elements of agile and using it, maybe he or she was really interested in the 2-week, the fortnightly cycle or elements that they wanted to use. Is that legitimate? Is that allowed? He's trying to innovate the way he's doing waterfall. I mean, I've heard it described as wagile, waterfall and agile. I've heard that term before. I don't know. It'd be interesting in your thoughts on it. But do you see what I mean? So they're not just doing agile for the sake of agile, but maybe there's bits of agile that really chime with anyone who does delivery. And it's like I'd like to pinch that and use it in the waterfall context. Do you think there's any transferable parts?
Absolutely. I think there's lots of tools, and it goes back to the agile as a mindset. It really is a mindset, and I think this is the one thing I've learned over the years since that very first moment somebody came in and threw agile at us. It really is a mindset. Therefore, for me, it's about being pragmatic. It's about being kind of nimble, but with a structure. And I think in that example there, I would have certainly promoted any of the things that that project manager, in fact, we did at the time, any of the things he'd seen that was happening in other teams that were, kind of applying some agile flavours. He took along. One of the best examples is we have this thing called a retrospective. It's where we reflect back on what's happened in the previous couple of weeks. We look to see if there's anything we could improve. Is there anything that that we might not want to learn from in terms of going forward? Now that was an example of something that he took actually, so he could still play that back in his team even though it was kind of, from a project management perspective or a project point of view, it's still a waterfall.
Yeah.
But actually things like that retrospective was something he could play in with his team to reflect and improve things when they were moving forward. Yeah.
And I dare say, because it's a really interesting topic, it kind of excites folks. Sometimes it exercises folks, about methods, and there's probably someone shouting at the screen, well, we've got a version of a retrospective that's in Prince 2, or it's a stage review or something, But you're right. It's just, you construct it yourself.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think where we've got to really quickly in this conversation is, if anyone wants to put their hand up and say, this is what Agile is, that's just a folly. Because you can't say exactly what it is. If it's a mindset, you can probably look at something and go, yeah, that's Agile, but it's not there's so many different versions of it. It's not like one single flavour. Would you agree?
That's absolutely right. There are several flavours, and it's, the word Agile itself came from, agility, and about being agile, being nimble, being flexible. And because of that, like I say, you can see how it is a mindset, and things like Scrum came along, where you can work in cycles and work in a certain way, help you be more agile, help you be agile, and kind of that's just one flavour of that mindset.
In that there are different flavours. Obviously, one of the things we're looking at, and you've got a lot of experience of, is using, adopting or taking on the agile mindset within the UK public sector. If again, I think folks maybe have heard about it who are more on the edges than are in the centre of it. They might say, is Agile just a fad? We'll be back to waterfall, or even actually they might not say that because they might not know waterfall either, but they might hear Agile and just think small a, just agility, but not really know that it's a capital A and it's got a few more things to it. So is Agile in the public sector here to stay? And what's the sort of, in your experience, if you had to sort of say that mindset of Agile, what makes that distinct perhaps from other interpretations? So
your first question around, is it a fad? I'd like to think it's not, but history tells us and informs us a lot. There's been various flavours of project management and how people kind of develop IT projects and digital projects. So we have form in the industry. We develop a new way of doing things, and then a few years later we'll develop a new way of doing things. I think for me, what I'm seeing is in that agile mindset space, there are more flavours of agile coming along. So I think agile will kind of remain that umbrella title, if you like. The different flavours of agile underneath that, Scrum, a thing called extreme programming, Kanban. There's various ways that people can structure agile deliveries, and then within that, each of those things then start to structure themselves. I think that's the part that will start to evolve, or will evolve more. I think we've in the past talked about DevOps as well. That's a thing that's kind of coming into the frame, which is kind of subject in its own right, but again, it helps being agile in certain circumstances. So I think that's the first part in terms of, is it a fad?
Just before we do the second part, that you mentioned extreme programming. Yeah. Just a very quick aside. I was at an event recently, and someone was talking about psychological safety in teams, and what they meant was having a team where people can fail, but safely. So it's not encouraged to fail, but if someone makes a mistake, it's just got a culture of, I've made a mistake. That's what they mean by psychological safety. And the guy was saying that in certain industries where you have psychological safety, there's actually less accidents. Yeah. And in places where you're not meant to discuss it, that not only are there more accidents, but they're also more serious. So get back to extreme programming, this is where, because I'd heard of extreme programming a long time ago, with the two. So if people who don't know what extreme programming is, it's two people programming together. One has the experience of either the language or the code or the domain or the system or all of the above, and the other doesn't. But what I learned on this psychological safety, and apparently they do this in medicine as well, that it's absolutely vital to have the junior person with their hands on the keyboard. Yes, the junior person. Yeah. And the reason is because if you have the senior person with their hands on the keyboard, or even more scary, the senior person with the scalpel, the junior person won't say anything if they think they've made a mistake, because the psychological, the relationship is a little bit parent-child, a little bit.
Absolutely.
So I found that really fascinating that you got this super bright person who's watching the really experienced person make mistakes, but they won't say anything, and switching around. So sorry, I've dived into a complete rabbit hole there, Dave. But it's just I just think we mentioned extreme programming. Quite a few people listening wouldn't know what that was. So we'll get back to the questions. We were talking about whether Agile in public sector was a fad.
I think Agile as a mindset is here to stay, that pragmatism, that agility and flexibility. Like I said, I think it's the flavours underneath that will evolve more. We touched on, DevOps is a thing that's happened over the last few years that actually is an enabler to being even more agile under certain frameworks. So I think they're the kind of things that will evolve. I think that Agile umbrella is probably around for a little while because it offers so much value. And just touching on psychological safety, that's kind of core fundamental in smaller teams, being able to, feel safe because then there's just that little bit more flexibility to be able to get on with things. And obviously there are safeguards, but no blame culture is fundamental to all the departments I've worked in and across government as well. Yeah.
If we get into maybe fail fast a little bit.
Yeah,
because I think that links to the psychological safety and the culture bit. So I remember that phrase and just seeing senior people rolling their eyes because they don't want to use the F word. Fail is just not a word you want to, especially when you've got a certain culture of delivery, and they didn't like that. So I sort of thought about it. I said, okay, can we express this in another way but mean exactly the same thing? And so I put in sort of like learn fast.
Yep.
Because ultimately the objective is to get the feedback and go, okay, we made a mistake, we've learnt, and move on.
Yep.
And it sort of suggests a bit more of but I suppose that's an example of me putting my own flavour on the mindset.
Yeah.
To sort of learn fast, and then if you do create those teams where I used to take part in some of the ceremonies, not often because you're not meant to do that, but I did it occasionally. But what I was really careful to say was, look, we're first amongst equals in this scrum, and I'm taking my CIO hat off now. And I'm putting my engineer hat on. So I'm joining this as an engineer.
Yep.
And I want to, as an equal, to help with understanding the problem that we're solving. So, which was a bit different from, me going, staring in, changing the dynamic of the team. And, I'm very, very careful not to do that very often because I know you're not meant to. But what's your thoughts on that? Was I being naughty, sort of inviting myself into certain sort of scrum meetings, etc.?
Not really. Again, I think it depends on the environment. I think there's a couple of things you touched on there. I think one is that everybody's equal, and again, you go back to the experience and the maturity of a particular team. A mature team will accept that. If you're coming in and you've said, actually, even though I'm the CIO, I'm coming in here as an engineer. You'll be credited or challenged on certain observations like anyone else. So I think again, there's a lot to do with the maturity of the team, and going back to the point about learning fast as well. I think in government there's a kind of structure around that enables you to speak with users, understand what their needs are, come back, build something. It might be a storyboard or it might be a kind of prototype of something. Or a mimic tool or something, go about, test it. And that's that learning fast objective I think you're just referring to there. It's learning fast before you actually start to build things properly. And there's various phases in the way that government do that in terms of how they do it to make sure that, okay, the fail fast thing, yes, absolutely. I think learn fast is probably the better way, and I much prefer that term. But the way government do it, they learn quickly up front, and they equally learn what doesn't work. And that then puts them on a stronger footing when they actually start to build something.
What that then does, I think what we've just worked out is you said right at the start that this Agile isn't a substitute for experience, and nor is Waterfall.
Yeah.
But actually the learning is building the experience. Actually you're creating almost like on-the-job knowledge creation, knowledge transfer, working it out, and getting that great experience building up all the way through. Which is, let's face it, if you're an engineer, that's what it's all about. It's learning. Well, not just engineers, anyone in technology. You're drawn, I think, a little bit to the flame because of it's exciting and you learn. And that's the best way to do it. The worst thing to do. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, even what I'm doing now, I kind of work with other delivery managers in the role. That's my role when I'm working in government, and I'll work with other delivery managers. And even then, it's a continual journey. It's a continual learning exercise. I started working with somebody just over 3 years ago, and I saw something they were doing, and I really liked it. I was like, do you know what? I really like what you're doing and how you did that. I'm going to start doing that. And it's having that openness. So, you never reach a kind of full level of maturity because everything's always evolving. But you know when you've got a certain level of maturity and able to do that. Looks like that's triggered something.
I love this story, and I learnt this when I was doing my A-level history. So that is, 150 years ago, literally, almost literally. And it was to do with the Victorians and selling encyclopedias.
Okay.
And what they said was, we've got 12, we've done 12. I don't know if you remember encyclopedias.
Yeah.
You know what? There's going to be a lot of people watching this who will not know what we're talking about because basically Google and other search engines that are available has sort of become Wikipedia, etc. Have become the there you go, Wikipedia encyclopedia. So, by the way, I hadn't just worked that out then. So the Victorians thought, right, we've done 12. There's probably just 12 more to make, and we will have got all the knowledge in the world contained in 24 volumes. And that was your point about learning. Yeah. If anyone's in technology and you're sitting there thinking, you know what, I think I've just about got it all covered. It's I don't think anyone does that anymore because the pace of change is brutal now. But I do, if you think there was a bit of a lull, and the waterfall, there was something called SSADM. I don't know if you remember that, but it's like the most. So it was describing in minute detail how to do effectively the longest project you could ever do because it was sort of waterfall made, and I think that was a little bit in the encyclopedia. Okay, that's how you do it. We've written it. Yeah. Now we don't need to. Now let's just get on and write some code.
It's interesting how that past experience. Certainly, when you talk SSAD, I remember being a development manager, in years gone by, and even doing bits of waterfall, and it never leaves you that experience. And just generally, whether you're a delivery manager, an engineer, a kind of quality assurance tester, even user researcher, now you're kind of continually learning different things and continually evolving.
And I suppose it's probably the point, and we mentioned SSADM and waterfall and agile, so I'd like to just get this in to the episode, which is and I'll put a link. We'll put a link to the actual author so that he is properly accredited. And apologies, I most definitely should have written his name down beforehand. But the author of Waterfall, the original author of Waterfall, at the very end of the paper, and I went and got the paper and read it. Just to, and you get right to the end, and he says something like, of course, you won't get this right first time through, so you need to iterate. So SSADM was partly influenced by that paper, but maybe it's one of those cases, where the printer, that last page got, wedged under the desk and nobody read it.
This episode is sponsored by CERT's IT Service Solutions. CERT's have a new innovative offering called Agility Ability that provides adaptable, flexible, and scalable expertise to deliver UK public sector transformation projects. If you are seeking a full journey management service, then our complete Agility Ability teams provides you with multi- and interdisciplinary teams with skill sets that change in line with the demands and evolution of your project.
So I think we're talking about that psychological safety, and one of the things they were saying is there's no room for ego in an agile team. But actually, ego is a psychological trait that everyone has. So if you don't have ego, you're probably not human. But you've got to manage it. So do you see, in your experience, when you're trying to get that gel working, how do you handle sort of initially maybe some competing ego or folks who maybe haven't done this sort of thing before?
Yeah.
I mean, do you find that some people are uncomfortable, or how what's your kind of take on that?
I have worked in teams that are kind of just forming and are still getting to grips with what we're doing or what the objective is, or maybe new team members that are joined, or it's a new team pulled together. And it's definitely a thing. And as a Scrum Master in that Scrum world / delivery manager, what I do now, part of what we do is kind of facilitate things. We might arbitrate between different things, and it's trying to do that in a constructive way. So yes, you get people with big egos that have a very definitive way of doing things, and people who are probably a bit quieter, the junior people that might not be quite keen to speak up. And it's really trying to build the forums to make sure that those people have a voice. And I have started sessions with those types of people by saying, I apologise in advance if I cut you short on something or stop you, but I'm doing it because I want to make everybody aware they've got an opportunity to speak, and I will kind of bring people in. And being able to do that up front sets the scene. So, if somebody then with a big ego is able to, kind of carry on or take over a conversation, it allows me, it's given me that license to be able to step in and say, right, thank you for that. Mary, what do you think? And get Mary's opinions on that sort of thing. And again, that's something you learn when you're in that facilitation piece, is set that framework up front. So no one's upset if you do have to cut them short a little bit, because, you set that. It's like, all right, okay, I know Dave said he would do that, or he might do that, so back off, and that works really well. It's very effective.
Just to put like a really contemporary spin on what you've just said, this when you talk about meeting folks like we are right now over a webcam, and you've got, except this time there's 12 of you, you're not in the room, you're not maybe able to read some of the body language, etc. But there's lots of people talk about not everyone is an extrovert. You've got got everyone, but actually everyone's got a really good contribution to make.
Yep.
So have you had any challenges trying to bring out people in that, let's let everyone have a voice, but specifically because of video conferencing, because not everyone's comfortable still just getting in front of a camera, and I don't mean that I think that's entirely fine, because it's just not for everyone. But do you have any experience of that, and any techniques?
Yeah, it's interesting to I mean, like I say, online gives people a kind of screen to hide behind if they want, and that's fine. Like I say, we don't, we're not going to force people to make them feel uncomfortable. And actually, one way of addressing that, to make people feel more comfortable, is to make that whole environment level. So it's bringing everything onto a par. And there are tools out there that can help you do that. We've run retrospectives, again, this kind of reflection cycle in what we do, or part of the cycle that we do. And there are techniques you can use where you just say to everybody, right, what do you think? And everybody chimes in a structured way. But the quieter people might not do that, and that's fine. But then there are other times when we'll do something that's a little bit on a par. And I remember doing a particular exercise, it was just at the start of the pandemic actually, when we thought we were only going to be working from home for 2 or 3 months. And after a couple of months, we said, I know, let's focus on, we had you could do themes. It's like, how did that release go? What's happening here? And we actually had a theme. We said, well, actually, let's see how this working from home lark is going for everybody. So everybody had a picture of a house, and everybody then had to put what they liked about, working from home, what they enjoyed, how effective or productive it made them, and anything they didn't enjoy about it as well. And because of that, everybody was brought onto the same page. Everybody had the same requirement to participate. And then it was a case of going around each individual. And again, it was a very much brought to a level playing field. And not only did it, we did have quiet members on the team. Not only did it bring their kind of voices to the table on that level playing field, What it also does is reveal some of the challenges, which is exactly what that, the purpose of that forum is for, to reveal any issues or challenges. So it did a couple of things, and that's why retrospectives isn't necessarily a set thing. It's something that you can adapt and change and be flexible with, not just in terms of the theme or the objective of what you're trying to get to the bottom of, but certainly in terms of creating that level playing field so everybody's comfortable participating.
Yes.
You've got some egos up here, some voices down here, and actually being able to bring them into a par, even if it's just for an hour a fortnight, is really useful.
Yeah.
And does that thing of bringing everybody to that same level, whether you're a CIO being an engineer or whether you're one of the junior developers listening and learning.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that theme. Do you subscribe to trying to get everyone to meet in real life, I think is the social media term, but for real, or once a month, or something where folks are actually connecting? Or are we now in a space where that's just no longer possible? Maybe you could get half the team, because the other challenge I've encountered is when you've got 90% of the team in person, but because we're so used to this, invariably there's some people who aren't there. So then you're not just managing across different dynamics, but you've also literally got folks who aren't getting any of the emotional cues in the room because they're not being able to see that. So it's quite difficult to manage. But it's risky, I think, to mandate things. But I've always found it really valuable to just have a connection in person at some kind of cadence.
I do agree. It's we occasionally meet in the office, some of the team. Now, we've not mandated it. In fact, we've tended to choose and pick days for team events where there isn't actually a team event, if that makes sense. So we don't force everybody to come into the office. So when we do meet in the office, it tends to be, the objective of being in the office is just to connect. It's just to speak with people. It's not it's not an essential to bring an objective or a forum or a particular meeting. It's purely to get together, chat, and somebody will say, oh, actually, if Sue's going to be in the office, I'll come in as well, or if somebody else is there. It's just a chance to catch up and connect. But I think it's difficult because, going back to the point you made earlier about junior people, I think they're probably the ones that suffer the most because they don't get the opportunity all the time to sit with somebody who understands what's going on and be able to chat. We do what we can with the tools available online to be able to pair up with people. And we've done that literally where people meet in a meeting room and they'll have their pretty much all day working together with somebody else and partnering up that way. It's not a substitute for being in the office at the same time.
No.
But there are pros and cons.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with you about make it about connecting with people rather than making it part of one of your delivery meetings. Because actually, we're all so efficient now at doing this, our delivery sessions online. It's actually easier to do that. But the value of connecting, and also you're telling everyone that actually connecting is really important because we're here just to connect.
Yeah.
And you get all sorts of conversations come off the back of it. Exactly. People might be thinking, oh, this is interesting, but this discussion is turning into a kind of remote working. The reason why I'm emphasizing it so much is because, you've said it's a mindset. We've talked about psychological safety. So there is a huge part of Agile which is about creating a really good team, isn't there?
There is, absolutely.
I personally, I think it's just a massive part of it. It's bringing out the best of everyone and creating that environment where you can really, create value and speak freely.
It is, yeah. I think it's something we touched on before. You were saying, what's the kind of thing I'm really passionate about in the Agile space, and it's something I've been asked before. And for me, it is that people side. It's having the people on board. It's having them engaged. I have a conversation with a friend that used to be in the forces, and we talk about banter. He had banter when he's in the armed forces, and it's not something a lot of other nations do in the same way that we do in Great Britain and the United Kingdom. He'd worked with a lot of foreign forces as well, and it was quite interesting. It's like they just don't get banter, and that for me is one of the big things in a team, a functioning team that gets on really well, is being able to have the banter, being able to have a bit of fun in what you're doing, and gauging it just right, and it makes things fun as well as productive, and that's come up in topics and conversations before. It's like, well, what do you want in an agile team? We want it to be fun, and it's a little bit of a cliche. It's like, well, yeah, but what does that really mean? It's like, we're not here to have fun, we're here to work. It's like, well, yes, we are, but that doesn't mean to say we can't have fun whilst we're doing it. So being able to create that safe environment, and that anybody can participate to the level that they're comfortable of. Yeah. Even the quieter voices sometimes might not want to, and that's absolutely fine. But getting the right balance and blend of a team and engagement in the team, because when you start to get that, people start to knuckle down, and it's amazing the results it can really produce.
Everyone who's listening can try this out. If you think back to a great team you were in, I hope everyone that's listening or watching can think of a team at some point in their career that they enjoyed. You won't necessarily remember exactly what you did, but you'll always remember how you felt.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's the sign. You look back, it's not even immediately obvious, when it's happening, but just a little bit of separation, and you're in a different environment that maybe isn't as good, and you look back and you think, wow, that was an amazing feeling, and we could get stuff done. So we are talking a lot about people, but I don't think we need to apologise, because I think that is really core, and maybe that is a little bit of a distinction that Agile brings out, because I don't remember SSADM talking in depth about teams, other than maybe racy matrices and stuff like this.
We're kind of in danger of kind of verging in the topic of culture, which is a very tough topic to start to solve. But it does actually start to play into that. It does actually start to play into culture, and having it, because it's a mindset. Then it's difficult to break the link between the two. So
there's the saying, and again, we'll accredit the person who said this, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. That's the old saying.
It is.
And I think if anyone's done any business change, if you're reading documentation that says we're going to change the culture of the firm or the company or whatever, that for me is a big red flag. It's like, well, that's going to take, actually, does anyone really want to change their culture? And even is it right to ask someone to change their culture? So it's a very complicated topic.
It is.
But I suppose this might be where we're getting into a little bit of what's special about Agile in UK public sector, because all organisations have a culture.
Yeah.
So if you think of the UK public sector culture, what elements of that are very receptive to Agile, and what elements of that are perhaps not as receptive? If I could kick us off, I would say, in my experience, the UK public sector, quite rightly so, there is what's the phrase when you're open to believing in something, but only if you see the evidence, but you won't just... I think it might be a skeptic, but I think the full definition of that is someone who is open-minded as long as they see the evidence.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I've seen quite a bit in the public sector. And I think that's a really good thing, because you should be looking at the evidence. But it does mean that you can't kind of arrive on a horse and go, we're doing Agile. Why? Well, because it's great. There's sort of, I want to see the evidence base. I don't know if you've encountered that at all.
I go back to when I was starting, like I say, I go back 10 years or so ago, probably a bit longer, and really starting to get into that space, because I was a skeptic to start with. I'd heard of it. I wanted to learn a bit more about it. And it was really, like I say, I was probably a bit naive at the time, but really it was we can do that. That's okay. That seems easy enough. We can do that. So even though it was quite sceptical, it was like, okay, we can give it a try. Now, at the time, it was very much a let's trial it, because actually we want to try it with the leadership team. So when you start to see the results, you might become a little bit more bought into it, or a little less cynical about it. And over a period of time, we did. So we were in a department. We had about 10 or 11 teams. We started with the senior management team. We were, like I say, we were kind of we were going through the motions, if I'm honest.
Yes.
And then we said, well, let's try it in one of our delivery teams. and they were a little bit not cynical, but like, okay, then let's give it a try. We've got these core deliveries we need to get out. Do we really have to give it a go? Can we afford to try and give it a bash? And it was actually very much so. And what surprised me was how much more effective and visible the success stories were, or the positives of taking an agile approach in a short space of time. I'm talking, 2 or 3 months of some large delivery cycles. You could just see how the team were functioning. And I was, one of the kind of team managers walking into one of the teams saying, I just want to watch how this works. Just pretend I'm not here. And they did. They really went for any suggestions they went for, but in a constructive way. And it was really interesting to see that. And I think just from my own personal experience, that was the first time I really started to see the value. So even though I'd been through an exercise, the first time I really started to see the value was when I was kind of stepped into a team that had really bought into it, and seeing their interactions, their body language, their engagement with the process, so that even they welcomed me in to participate. And I was like, well, how about that? Are we going to be able to make timescales? It's like, we can if we do this. And it was really, it was a real selling point for me seeing that.
People talk about engaging stakeholders, stakeholder management. It's almost, sometimes I hear it sounds a bit robotic.
Yeah.
I think if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking about who are these stakeholders and how do we manage them, I think what you just articulated, which is an audience that can move between being skeptical and cynical, if you can detect that's a real practical example of managing a stakeholder.
Yeah.
Find your stakeholder. They might be in a cynical state, and I think if they're cynical, maybe they've got bad experience. They're not just. It's not just I just don't like stuff.
I think it's interesting because actually we kind of want the feedback. The idea of what we do with that mindset. It is about learning. It's about learning fast, as we were talking earlier. And if we're going to get a stakeholder in that might be quite skeptical about what we're doing or cynical about the results they might get from this, it's like, well, come on in, and challenge what we're doing. Give us the thing that you think we're missing, and we'll play that into it if we can, if it's something that's valuable. So it's getting that feedback, like I say, that learning as quickly as possible. So it is valuable to get those stakeholders engaged in the right forums at the right times to capture that learning. And if they've challenged it, it's going to go one of two ways. On a kind of spectrum, really. One half of the spectrum is it's something we haven't got. It's a good learning experience. It's something we can take and we can work with. The other half of that bit of a spectrum is somewhere in between. Actually, we've already got that covered. To actually, we've smashed it. We nailed that. What you mean is this, and then they go, oh yeah, that's right. So you're kind of on that spectrum. But generally, it is in two halves of we haven't got that, but it's something we can take away. Versus, oh yeah, we've got that. This is what it looks like. In any event, it's that here's the feedback. Here's my thinking from a stakeholder, and one way or another, they have to feel like they've gone away with some sort of positive experience. Even if it's they've gone away and thought to themselves, actually, they didn't have that, but they're now thinking about it, or now it's on their radar.
Yes.
And it genuinely is. So either way, there's a positive to that stakeholder engagement.
One observation is that getting requirements wrong is a really big empirical kind of fact around why a lot of technology projects don't go so well.
Yeah.
And when I mean get them wrong, I don't really mean they've been implemented incorrectly. So I'm not talking about we articulated the requirements really clearly, but we failed to execute. I'm more about we really articulated the requirements probably too early.
Yeah.
And so when those went into the hopper, they've come out pretty much as we asked for them, but they've now turned out to be something we didn't need.
Yeah.
I mean, God, how many of us we've all been there, haven't we, in this sort of discussion of requirements? So I was wondering about your view on how the agile approach can help with trying to mitigate that risk.
Yeah.
So that was part of the question. The other part I wanted to throw in as well, and it's linked to your experience point that you said at the start, which is in my opinion, agile waterfall. I mean, I know waterfall has a big phase called design, but I think you really can't underestimate how important it is to have the best possible fulfilled view of what your product is going to be, or the design, up front, rather than saying, you know what, we don't need to know anything at all because we're just going to start with a blank piece of paper and iterate from scratch.
Yeah.
In my experience, when that's happened, you can be very pragmatic, and pragmatism in short bursts is good, but if you're pragmatic all the time, you can end up with these sort of cul-de-sacs of, actually, we now can't do what we want to do with the design. We've got to go back. We've got to do something else.
Yeah.
So I'll give a computer science example. Anyone anywhere in the world does anything to do with technology, security should be in your design thinking right at the beginning, because it's almost impossible to reverse engineer that.
Yeah.
And with everything that's happening around cyber and all the vulnerabilities that we've got, that will kill off whatever you're trying to do. And if it doesn't kill it off when it's gone live, it'll be a couple of years down the road. So I'm just giving that as an example. So, security would be a design consideration right up front. But what's your view on requirements and design? How important are those, and how do you handle those in Agile?
I mean, a couple of really good points you touched on there. I think in terms of how the public sector works, there's a continual cycle of getting feedback, and even when a service is live and it's I'll say finished, quote unquote, there's a continual feedback loop. So if you go onto any government site, invariably there is a link to provide feedback, and again, invariably all these different departments collect that feedback and look to improve it further. So even right from the very outset, in terms of doing some initial designs, getting a design that actually looks like it works quite well, it's tested with users very well, we've prototyped it, we'll look to move forward and actually build it. Even through that whole phase, even when you get to the end, it's still evolving. There's still that desire to capture more feedback, enter a survey about what you thought and then your suggestions. So in terms of research and feedback, that's just a continual loop, and I think UK government do that extremely well. But then, like you say, you talk about the other requirements, the design, not just about the design of what it looks like from a user point of view, but security, privacy, data, how does it fit in with things like policy for various aspects? Is there any legislative design aspect that needs to be required? That there are a host of engineers and solution architects that sit in the background with service designers and policy people that make sure these sorts of things are kind of built in. And in the same way that feedback loop continually exists, once you've got the security and the privacy and data aspects, for example, built into that solution, the job isn't done. As you know, and as you kind of alluded to there, there's the people that are trying to hack this information or maybe do some criminal damage to it will find a new way to do that, and then there's a security upgrade to be done. So whilst on the front layer you have this continual feedback loop from a user point of view, so the design is coherent and up to date and maintained properly for the time, it's always up to date. So is that bit that sits underneath, that security aspect, that technological design sits underneath. And when we talk about team, we didn't talk about solution engineers, the architects of all this, they're kind of fundamental to what we're doing, and making sure that they've got the right foundations in place to prop things up, and not just at that time, but also so that, hang on a second, we now need to upgrade that because this has happened. And again, it's just a continual evolution. And you can't afford to stand back on your laurels on this. It's something that's got to continually evolve.
The exam question is, Dave, how am I going to be successful in applying Agile within UK public sector?
Remember that Agile is a mindset. It's about being pragmatic. It doesn't mean to say, it's something that you can take shortcuts in things. It's about being pragmatic. I think for anybody looking at how they're doing this, if they want to use government as a public sector as a kind of model and think, well, how do they do that? I would say anybody's got to start small. Start small and learn things. And, there is that fail fast, learn fast cliche, whatever we talked about. And it's true. It's a thing. It's that fail fast. You will find ways of not doing things properly, and that's a success. But yeah, so it is. It starts small. It's understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. Like I say, do you really need to be agile? You might not. It might be a waterfall project. You might be trying to put a square peg into a round hole. So there's a few things, but I think start small, remember it's a mindset, look at the different flavours. If you want to get someone involved to help you, there a variety of what we call agile coaches, people that will help how you do it. There's plenty of forums, there's lots of material on the internet, and that can be a bit scary in its own right because there is so much material. We go back to the encyclopedia, Wikipedia example, Google, there's just so much out there. But as I mentioned in that example with that developer that I worked with, where we said, well, actually, it's going to be a little bit like that thing we did before, and it's going to take about 2 months. The kind of principle behind that was looking for something similar that we'd done before. So if you're starting government, look for something simple that's been done before. Can it be mirrored? Can it be echoed? Is it very similar? Is there some complications? And just learn from that, really. There's a lot of agile is based on baselining aspects, taking that baseline, comparing it to what you want to do next, and having a view from there. So I hope that's helped.
I'd add to that, which is seek out someone like Dave for a coffee. I mean, Dave, I hope you're not going to get inundated with coffee requests, but the point is that I would be really wary of folks, because there's folks in this space. It does create a bit of a divide, and folks go, "Well, that's not agile." That's people just really get really worked up in social media, which is actually a sort of a study that's been done as to why that is. So we just park that to one side. But if you're learning about this, I would just be really careful of anyone who's telling you what it isn't or sounding very sort of dogmatic. At the end of the day, you're going to deliver your projects successfully, and you're going to do it in all sorts of different ways. And actually, let's be honest, on some days it is genuinely under the heading of make it up as you go along. We've all been there. But just make sure you're getting those sources from folks who have done it before. And then I think that's a good way of doing it. Be very careful about taking a position too early on these things.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, a huge thank you for dedicating some of your Friday afternoon, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And I'm sure we'll get some really interesting themes and reflections on the topics we've just covered.
Yeah,
thank you
I
very
hope
much.
so. It'd be really good to get the feedback. That's what we're doing. It's seriously, learning anything is just useful. It just gets packed into the arsenal of things we can take forward. But thank you for the opportunity, John, to have this chat. It's been really good.
Cool. You're very welcome.